Welcome to Counterpoint, where in this episode we visit Germany and Poland through the lens of a new Irish documentary focusing on the impact of migration on their societies and on political change. I'm Eddie Hobbs. Let's break it down. In studio with me is Keith Woods, but first a clip from my last episode has been viewed over 4 million times so far across platforms worldwide, garnering reactions from Australia, from Canada to Europe and the UK. It did so because it shifted the focus to potential solutions. Let's begin there. For me, Denmark really stands out because the whole Danish system seems to be built on data, not on opinion, data. And when you look at the data, you see that what have they done? It takes 8 years to become a citizen. But for 4 of those years, you cannot have been reliant on Danish social protection. They only take in 5,000 citizens a year. They clearly show the ethnicity of crime based on the current migrants that are coming in and their the generation before that, and then they stop, and they produce the data. And what I say to people is, if you think all of this is kind of made up, you can actually go into the Danish CSO, which is called Danmark Statistik, translated to English, and you can actually do your own research. But in Ireland, we're not even allowed to talk about this. And, we have hate speech bills on the back burner, and when they come in, you could get arrested for talking about this. So, welcome back to studio. Keith, your documentary, The Migrants Are Coming, was released this week. So my first question for you is, what prompted you to make this documentary? And then we'll get into the content.
Well, originally we heard this story about a dispute between Germany and Poland over their own border. And this resolves around Germany returning migrants that had crossed over from Poland. Many of these were migrants that came to Poland through its eastern border on Belarus. That's obviously something that's been kind of weaponized by Belarus and Russia in the last couple of years against Poland. But this was interesting because it seemed like the Schengen system was under threat. In the end, by the time we were there, Poland actually did bring back border checks with Germany and its other neighbours. So kind of an undoing of the Schengen system. So that interested us. But then when we got there, we realised this is really symptomatic of parties in government in Poland and Germany. Even though neither is nationalistic or right-wing, they're having to at least be shown to be moving in that direction because of pressure from their right. So we went over, and it was just a few months after in Poland, they had a presidential election where a populist right candidate won. Obviously, there was federal elections in Germany this year where AfD performed very well, second largest party. Since then, they're the largest. So actually, this was part of a bigger story where you have a conservative chancellor in Germany who is under intense pressure with the growth of AfD, and he has to be seen to be taking action on illegal immigration. Similar with Poland. Tusk is kind of an EU technocrat. He has to be seen to be taking a tougher stance on this.
He's the president, right?
He would be their prime minister.
The prime minister.
Yeah. So he's more of a liberal technocrat, which kind of makes him more of an oddity in Polish politics.
Well, could we just go back to Germany for a second? Because in preparation for this, I had to dive into political data, which you'll know back to front. But what really jumps out at me is that from 2021 to 2025, the AfD, which came out of Eastern Germany and were only set up in 2013, have doubled their, they're doubling in the polls. They're now at the second largest party in Germany. They were at 10% in 21. They're at 21% now, effectively, and they've knocked off the one of the big beasts off their pedestal, which was SPD. And how do you see all that now shaping up? Because on the basis of your documentary and the people that you've interviewed, it looks as if the momentum is continuing to grow.
Oh yeah, absolutely it is. I mean, since we filmed that, actually, there were opinion polls out just this week that show AfD is now the most popular party in Germany. I think it's as high as 28% now. So that really is momentous, and this is a party, you mentioned its growth from the period you said, but actually this was only established just over a decade ago. It's quite interesting because originally this was established by economists, intellectuals. These are people that were kind of within the fold of Angela Merkel's CDU party, but they became skeptical the direction the party was moving in, especially Eurozone policy, things like the bailouts, the euro itself. So they coalesced around these economists and intellectuals. And it was really a side effect of this stance that Merkel, her party, German politicians in general in the mainstream have taken of you establish this firewall of basically anything to the right of what would have been Merkel's position. You give that no air, you give that no space, you don't engage with that, you don't play to that in elections. And so what you had for a long time with Merkel is she basically started to implement the Green Party's agenda in Germany. And this was kind of her election strategy is, okay, who are the kind of ideological alternatives we're facing in elections? Well, you're the big party, so you just take their policies, implement them as your agenda, and then there's no reason to vote for these smaller parties. So she was only doing this, of course, for the leftist party, specifically the Green Party. And this obviously left a huge opening on the right that there was no, genuine conservative or populist alternative.
Just on Merkel, I'm going to pause you there because I picked a couple of clips from your documentary, having just looked at it this morning, so in detail. So I just want to, just to play this clip where you're talking about these events in Germany to camera, doing it very like a real pro, if you don't mind me saying so, and you're talking about Angela Merkel. So let's have a listen to that clip.
In 2015, Angela Merkel threw open Germany's borders. Over 1.2 million refugees came to Germany in that year alone. And since then, legal immigration has also skyrocketed. 9 million people came to Germany in the years between 2015 and 2022, a period that saw the rise of the AfD. Now, 19 million people in Germany, or 23% of the population, are either migrants or the children of migrants that have come here since 1950. As German living standards now decline, a recent poll showed that 31% of Germans said they will definitely leave Germany if given the chance, and 27% said they would probably make that decision. Interestingly, 61% of those respondents said that immigration is a major factor influencing that decision.
Well, what I found remarkable about that clip wasn't the fact that you were very cool, having your ice cream while you were delivering. I thought that was particularly well done. Was the statistic that 31% of Germans would leave Germany if they could? 29% would probably leave, and I just found that, and that, in other words, a huge proportion of the German population have become deeply dissatisfied with their fate.
Yeah, it's an incredible statistic. I couldn't quite believe it myself when I saw it. But you had a high-profile case of that recently. There's a very famous German football player, Toni Kroos, left Germany for Spain permanently, and he actually said it was because he didn't feel like it was a safe place to raise his children because of immigration, which caused a huge uproar, of course, when he said that. But yeah, 31% is a massive number, and I've never imagined Germany as being quite as far down that path as some other countries like the UK. But when you get into the numbers, it really is staggering. There's something like 1,600 mosques in the UK. It's 2,600 in Germany. There was a statistic out last year, more than half of children in German schools now are from a migrant background. And you get into the larger cities. We were just walking through Berlin. You can really see the change. There are areas of Berlin that are just, they're ghettos. You don't walk through them. We had, at one point we were trying to film, we had a guy kind of harassing us, asking us about our camera. There's a quite well-known park in the center of Berlin we walked through where they legalized drug dealing. They had such a problem, it's been filled with migrant drug dealers, specifically since the migrant crisis, and they deal drugs in the open. The police couldn't get on top of this, and the leftist government in Berlin decided, let's just allow people to deal drugs in this park. So it's quite an experience. We tried to get some footage. At the time, we didn't really get a lot. It was we were there it was a bit of a heat wave. But you can see in this park, yeah, it's pretty much entirely migrants. They're dealing drugs in the open, and you see German families walking through with their kids like it's the most normal thing in the world. So Germany is quite far down this path. You really can see what's motivating this rapid change towards AfD.
Yeah, I'm just going to refer back to your first visit to Counterpoint Studio when you actually were talking about the quality of the data within the Danish system and the Danish statistic. Which people can go and see it for themselves. But here you seem to resonate with what your findings were in Germany. I just want to play this second clip where you're actually talking about the interconnection between the crime data and the most recent migration change. Let's have a listen to this.
During the migrant crisis, German society was initially very welcoming of the new arrival. But Germans have seen directly how migration has transformed their society for the worse. According to federal crime statistics, migrants are 3 times overrepresented in general crime, but this rises to more than 4 times for violent crime, and over 15 times overrepresentation for crimes like pickpocketing. These rates are even higher when you look specifically at the many non-Western migrants in Germany. And Germany is now regularly in the news for its problem with migrant crime. Last December, a migrant drove a car through a Christmas market in the eastern city of Magdeburg, killing 6 and injuring hundreds. In May, a Syrian asylum seeker stabbed 5 young people outside a popular student bar in the German city of Bielefeld.
Very interesting about this part of it all is the focus on data rather than on opinion. Let's get away from the tropes and start actually looking at what's the data showing us. This interconnection between recent migration, surges in population in different countries, and the actual data on crime. There's not a lot of countries in Europe that are actually recording this information, is there?
No, but that's why it's so interesting that the few that do, you see they're pretty much universal patterns. I mean, right down to the ethnicities, the national groups that are most represented in the data. I mean, if you go across from Sweden to Denmark to Germany, you'll see groups like Afghans, Algerians specifically, very high in violent crime rates. And, I always go back to this because these are oftentimes leftist governments collecting these. I mean, the clip you played about Denmark, I mean, this is basically a kind of leftist technocratic government that just decided to take a scientific look at this. But the patterns are basically universal. And this is a great kind of contradiction of modern liberal governance, is we're supposed to take this very technocratic, data-based kind of materialist attitude to everything. But as soon as it involves any kind of group dynamics like this, things that, should really just be, as you said, a basis of common sense policy and who are you bringing into your country, what kind of outcomes are they going to produce? Yeah, it's totally off limits. And, a lot of the stuff that's mentioned there, I mean, a lot of that I pull from actually Germans that live outside Germany that compile this data from Germany's own statistics, their police statistics, but turn it into infographics and approachable stuff. And they have to post it outside of Germany because, of course, there could be consequences if they're talking about this topic within Germany.
Yeah, how close is that's a kind of a, it's a very interesting point that that the fact that the science is there until and unless the establishment regard that the science is not in their favour, and then you can't use the hurty words. It becomes about hate speech, and of course we have the hate speech bill still on the back burner with pressure on from the EU to implement it. But we're seeing it being implemented in Britain with a huge increase in people being arrested for stuff that they've put out on tweets or may have said. And when you compare and contrast what's happening in the UK, because we're seeing a lot of that just flows over from British media, but we're not seeing what's going on in Germany because we don't watch German media. So how do you compare the two?
Yeah, I mean, I think Britain has a lot more of the kind of anarcho-tyranny, like it arrests something like over 10,000 people a year for things they've posted online. It's a lot of this clamping down on speech and, minor kind of behavioral violations. Like you saw the woman that was arrested for praying outside an abortion clinic. Germany is similar, but it's sort of a different form of censorship and control in that it's really built into the German constitution and the deepest infrastructure of the German state. Like, for example, Björn Höcke is one of the leaders of AfD. I think he leads it in a popular area called Thuringia. And he actually received a fine and was punished under this sort of anti-Nazism legislation because he said a phrase in Germany that means all for Germany. And this is a phrase that predates Nazism by decades in Germany. Because they could establish, at some point, I think the Brown Church or something used this phrase as well, then he was promoting Nazism and he faced the consequences of the law for that. Shortly afterwards, he he said half of it and the crowd finished the sentence, and he also got punished for that. So, I mean, what's being discussed in Germany is really scary in terms of the kind of tyranny that they consider to deal with AfD. I mean, you mentioned SDP, which is the second largest party, or was before AfD passed them out. But prior to the rise of AfD, this was a party, you can think of like the two-party system here with Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael. Like SDP has come either second or first in every election in the post-war period. And they've come out in favour of banning AfD under the German constitution. And what that means is, it doesn't mean that you go and have new elections and maybe re-elect the same people under a different name. I mean, it would actually mean that within the existing parliament, AfD speakers would be removed, and then the far left parties led by the SDP would become a majority. They could remove Merz, the CDU chairman, current leader of Germany, and essentially establish a kind of far left dictatorship in Germany. And then with that, anti-Nazism legislation, of course, they can go after any other person they deem to be a right-wing extremist. So it like on all levels of German society, you're seeing this tyranny creeping in. I mean,
And is this being discussed for members now as well of the civil service?
Yeah. This is another recent thing. Is I mentioned in the documentary at one point that there's sort of a special branch in Germany that's supposed to oversee maintaining this constitution, which, I mean, essentially the purpose is that you prevent the rise of populism, you prevent the rise of anything that undermines the open society, the liberal infrastructure, the human rights regime. And this organization deemed AfD to be, the phrase they use is certainly right-wing extremists. So again, it's this very like bureaucratic leftist language. But they've been able to use that designation to take AfD off intelligence committees that other parties are allowed on. They're now using it to root them out of the civil service if you're just an AfD supporter. And, to put this in perspective, again, it's the most popular party in Germany. About 1 in 8 Germans are actually employed by the public sector. And so they're now sending this message that, for a very large chunk of German society, they can basically destroy their career prospects if they're seen to be sympathetic to this party.
So are you suggesting then, the data is suggesting, I should say is probably a better way, that this kind of suppression, this pressure coming on from the left is actually growing. It's growing the very thing that they're trying to suppress.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the predicament they're in. I guess that's the predicament, in terms of like the tyrannical liberal states in the West. This is always the predicament, is how mask off do you go in your tyranny, right? Because if you go fully mask off and you just ban this party and you say, no, actually you can't have immigration restriction, you can't have a party that says Germany should be for the Germans, then are you going to risk something else other than a popular democratic alternative? Are you going to push people towards something more drastic? And so they have this balance. The CDU doesn't want to go as far as banning them, but it's a very large chunk, again, that you have this very large centre-left party, practically all the left in Germany, and even German public opinion. It's pretty much, it's quite incredible that you have about a quarter of Germans supporting AfD, but you've almost half of Germans that support banning the party. So, I mean, you look at these things and you see like it's really tending towards conflict, because the only people that are really putting forward anything in terms of vision, policy for Germany is AfD on the right, nationalism, and then on the left, radical leftist parties, the Green Party, and you have these zombie parties in the middle like CDU that kind of soak up the older voters, and they're kind of keeping everything in place, they're kind of keeping the stability of the system. But, their voters are dying with every year, and the younger generations are basically split between the AfD and the radical left. So it's you can start to see that this system is actually quite fragile.
Well, I have a pretty thin understanding of German politics, but just looking at it purely as a mathematical exercise, at the moment the AfD are at popular, they're 28% popularity, and in the last federal elections, which was this year, the CDU, who are the Conservatives, as I understand it, we're at 28%. So you add them together and you're 54. It just seems to me that the Conservatives and the AfD could theoretically end up in a coalition and give them a marginal number of seats in excess of the total from the rest of the kind of the splinter parties, mostly on the left. Is that the way it's been seen, or is there something else bubbling away in the background?
Well, that is what would make sense on the numbers, but this is where the so-called firewall comes in, which is essentially established to just totally block AFD out of power and is primarily enforced by the conservative CDU. And yeah, what's interesting is, as you mentioned, the more kind of moderate left party is declining. But at the same time, what's growing, especially among the youth, is just these really crazy radical left parties like the Linke, the Green Party, communist offshoots. And it's increasingly getting to the point where the CDU is so determined to block out the AFD and to not work with AFD at all costs that they're going to have to enter into coalitions with rabble of radical leftists. And then at that point, it becomes really damaging for their credibility that they're trying to appeal to the same voters as AFD. They're trying to appeal to conservative Germans. And you realize that if it's going to become this binary, Germans are going to realize they're either voting for AFD or a massive coalition of parties that's going to be dominated by the radical left. This reminds me, actually, there's a book by two political scientists called How Democracies Die. One of the authors, his name is Zisblatt, and he looks at historical cases of the collapse of what they call democracy. Now, these are, modern liberal theorists. So for them, democracy essentially means liberal pluralism. It's the human rights regime, it's the hate speech laws, it's the NGOs. And what they see as the enemy of democracy is populism, right? Which is what democracy you would think means, the majority will, that is what rules. But no, it's their democracy is openness, tolerance, institutions, universal human rights. But the pattern they find is that the number one way that you maintain that and you prevent populism is you have a strong center-right party, kind of a strong phony right party. And actually their sort of paradigmatic example is the CDU in Germany. They say this is why Germany has been such a stable, open, liberal, pluralist society, is because you have this large CDU party that basically soaks up everything on the right. If there's some frustration about immigration, taxes, the EU, those people, they're just going to vote for the CDU anyway, so it's not a problem. But now for the first time, that's kind of been broken down. And it's sort of a similar pattern I see happening everywhere. I mean, you saw the collapse of the Conservatives in the UK. Now you have Reform. Now you have Advance UK. You've Restore Britain. You've all these new groups that are much more to the right and are pushing things further right. And this is a process that's happening throughout Europe because these kind of dinosaur post-war conservative parties like the CDU, if you look at their voters, it's heavily kind of boomer demographic. You go among the youth, oftentimes these conservative parties, they have less support than like communist parties. So this traditional means of preserving liberal pluralism, the kind of post-war open societies that have been very stable for our whole lifetime, it's really collapsing because of the demographic changes, the changes in voting patterns, and the kind of spearhead of all this is right populist movements like the AFD.
Yeah, and when you look then at the pressure that's put on to try and generate this control, actually, as you were talking there, I was beginning to see in my mind Fine Gael and the Irish Times,
right,
as being kind of the equivalent over here. But your documentary, The Migrants Are Coming itself, how was the response to the filming itself when you were in Germany, and what has happened to the recording since it was done?
Right. Well, yeah, we got a good welcome from the AFD, but not so much from the German mainstream media. I mean, I was surprised. I think we were only one day after filming the interview I did with the AFD Parliament member Lena Kotray, and there was like 2 or 3 mainstream media articles about me.
She was the spokeslady, was she, on the
yeah, she's the spokesperson for remigration.
Yeah.
And yeah, basically Germany's equivalent of the BBC, Die Welt, and a couple of other publications had, full page on me and how terrible I am and that this is who the AFD is hanging around with. But this is because of the intense pressure campaign where, not just the left-wing parties, but basically the entire media establishment is behind banning the AFD and is intensely trying to find any kind of connections with the far right, with extremism that they can use to justify that. So, I mean, yeah, it gave me a taste of the kind of intense pressure they're on where, you're talking to these people, they're elected members of parliament, they've got popular mandates. I mean, in the area I was in, Brandenburg, they're by far the most popular party. They get like 34-5%. And, they're talking about the serious possibility that the state may just ban them, and these people will just, you're not a politician anymore. You don't have the correct politics. It's quite bizarre.
Yeah, what's interesting there is that, from what I understand, is that the AfD, before we get on to Poland, because I want to get to Poland as well, that the AfD's main focus is on migration, the economy, and on EU policies. I mean, that's generally the kind of pool that they're in. But if they've gone from, a starting point of zero support in 2013 when they were set up, and they're now at, in the polls anyway, they're at 28%. And if they're subject to further suppression, sure, they're naturally just going to grow. I mean, most societies just don't put up with that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I just wanted to then talk to you about Poland. Poland is, whatever my knowledge was on Germany, my knowledge on Polish politics was even slimmer. So I found this very, very interesting. First thing I wanted to ask you about, just to sketch out the Polish political landscape, and to comment on one particular point that I found absolutely fascinating was that the younger voters, the young men seem to be going towards the equivalent of AfD in Poland, Confederacja, excuse me.
Yeah.
Apologies to all Polish people in Ireland for butchering that. And but Polish young women seem to be going in a different direction. So I found that very interesting. But what can you tell us about Poland and its political makeup and how it is also changing?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's much further to the right than Germany, obviously. I mean, like Tusk, who's in power now, he's basically as liberal as you get in the mainstream of Polish politics. He's had all of these kind of EU high-level rules. But his headline thing was like, I've cracked down on 99% of the border crossings from Belarus, right? So even he is he'd be like a far-right extremist in this country, right? That's kind of where the line is. And, Confederacja would be further to the right of AfD in that, the Conservative Party there, Peace and Justice, people might be familiar with one of their spokesmen, Dominik Tarczynski. This is the guy, he goes on Western media and he says, not one Muslim in Poland, not one refugee. That's kind of the moderate centre-right party. And then Confederacja are like, these guys are too moderate. So the political compass there is way beyond anything we're used to here. But yeah, again, you see this interesting pattern where the more moderate centre-right party, Peace and Justice, all of their support basically comes from older Poles. And then you again see this pattern that seems to be universalising everywhere in Europe, except Ireland so far. But I guess we're a few years behind. The youth are split between the radical right and the radical left. And in Poland, it's very much a gender division as well.
Yeah, and I found that just because I haven't run across that before in looking at these things. But why are the Poles, because they're pretty tight borders now in comparison to some other countries.
Mm-hmm.
Why are they so vexed right now, and why is it growing? Why is this this new Confederacja? Is that I made a mess of it again? Maybe growing from like it started out, just looking at the numbers here. It started out like at 3 or 4%, and in recent polls now it's up around 14%. I mean, these are huge gains.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, I think that may even be higher now. I mean, there's from what I was hearing from people that aren't kind of partisan there. I think there's a very good chance they'll be in government after the next election. People I was talking to there, so it's a rapid change. And again, you see the youth are very much driving this change, where they're not really interested in the kind of rightist politics of old. And generally, they tend to go more left than the older generations. But the ones that do go right tend to go for something more radical, something not quite seen before. This blend of more explicit sort of ethno-nationalism.
What's bringing the youth out? And say, I'm just looking at it from an Irish perspective. Where our younger voters tend to be more interested in other things until suddenly they're not, as they get a bit older. But I mean, I'm just looking at your documentary, at the profile of the people you were talking to. These are young people. Well, I mean, people in their 20s, and their 30s. That generally speaking wouldn't be out in the kind of numbers they're in, doing the type of things that they're doing. What's caused that in Poland? What's the difference?
Well, that's one interesting thing I discovered, actually. Is I was kind of going in assuming as well, Poland, it's Ireland 20 years ago, and it will follow the same kinds of trends that we followed. But actually, one thing that's different, I met so many people that were like Confederacja activists, and so many of them had lived in Ireland or the UK or the US.
And gone back.
And they go back to Poland, and their number one takeaway is like, I'm not going to let Warsaw become like London. I'm not going to let my hometown become like Dublin. And it's really incredible the degree to which that is a factor in politics. And with the younger people as well, you'll even see in the documentary, again and again, I hear this phrase from young people. They'll say, well, okay, maybe even if they're on the left, they'll be like, I don't really have a problem with immigrants or immigration, but I don't want Poland to become like France. I don't want Poland to become like the UK. So it's interesting that social media has kind of allowed people to see the bad examples of where this leads, because there isn't the same level of political correctness, obviously, in Poland. So you can't just talk about this stuff. This stuff gets shared around on social media. And yeah, what's interesting to me, even the kind of left-wing people, I spoke to a lot of young women that are moving to the political left because of the abortion issue. But even if you talk to them, they're like, well, yeah, but I don't want Poland ever to become like the West.
Yeah.
And that's basically their interaction with social media, and essentially just seeing how crazy things have gotten in places like the UK, France,
well, that's actually
here.
That's a very credible explanation for it, because that it's the young people coming back from stints in Ireland or elsewhere, and with a sort of a different political take. So when you sit back then, because it's your thing, you're clearly very informed on these things, Keith. That's why I keep talking to you. Find it very, very interesting. What do you see in, say, the next election cycles in Europe and the one after that? Where do you see this ending up? Because it looks as if there is a gap after opening up between the old political establishments and the people. And the people aren't far right. The people are the people. The Overton windows, we call it, the difference, the two extremes and left and right have shifted. But the political structures haven't. They seem to be asleep at the wheel at the moment. But how do you see that working its way out over the next few cycles in Europe?
Well, I mean, if the elites were sensible and were willing to look at this in a very sensible way, I think they would follow the course that you saw in the US recently, where there is kind of a vibe shift. There's a sense we went a bit too far with the wokeness. We're going to pull back on this a little bit. Okay, we're going to allow people to talk about immigration. We're going to pull back some of these crazier spokespeople that have been in the media all the time. I just don't have confidence in Europe's elites to do that. So I think, especially with the younger generation, like, I just don't see what the brakes are in the train in terms of this polarization that's happening, where there's no interest in the old conservative parties, the old liberal parties. If someone is political now below a certain age, they're basically going off to the radical right or the radical left. And I don't see how that can be arrested, because I think eventually you will get more kind of centrist, populist alternatives, the Farage types that will come into government. But I think, the anger has bubbled up to such a point that I'm not sure they're going to enact policies that are going to satisfy that. So, yeah, we're heading for a very polarized time in politics. We might, maybe some people will long for the kind of stability we had for a long time, where you have these dominant centrist, center-right parties. But, I mean, the issues that are there with migration, with the kind of ghettoization that's happened in these countries, it's just not the kind of thing that's going to be reversed by, a moderate kind of coalition government. And the problems are going to keep making people angry. And, the economy is ticking by for so long, but we all know there's always these kinds of black swan events or potential economic crisis. And it just seems like there's an undercurrent right now that it's hard to see how it's going to go away with a few moderate reforms.
Yeah, well, I don't suspect it will. That's why I asked you the question, because you ended your documentary on a kind of a positive note, which I said, well, that's very interesting. And that was that, because you were looking forward into the future as to what was going to happen. So, I mean, what you were saying, I just want to put this as a question.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed to me what you were saying is that, look, this migrant issue cannot be solved by a beggar your neighbour approach, an atomization around it. There has to be, if Europe wants to stay together, there has to be a collective European proper response to this. Otherwise, what will happen is that Germany will try and beggar Poland. Poland might throw some refugees over into, the Baltic countries. Britain will start saying, well, let's dump them down from Northern Ireland down to the Republic. They have plenty of space there. And, all of that just becomes chaotic eventually. And we're back to square one, which is that we have to come up with a solution that actually works. Is that how you see it unfolding?
Yeah, and again, it's this common trend you see with leftist governance where, you know, the left comes into power and they establish the treaties and the infrastructure and the documents that constrain the right when they come into power
What do
in
you
the
mean the
next cycle.
treaties? Sorry, just explain.
The treaties, as
the
in,
treaties, right.
for example, the European Convention on Human Rights.
No, I heard it with my Cork voice, you see. I heard 3Ds, yeah. 3Ds, yeah.
A good example is the European Convention on Human Rights, right? Because that's the reason they can't deport these people that are coming on the small boats in the UK, right? This was the headline campaign promise of Keir Starmer to get Labour back in. But because they're signatory to the European Convention on Human Rights, they have to allow these people trials. They've got to give them lawyers. They've got to house them while they're going through this trial. So there's all this kind of infrastructure that's been established by successive liberal European governments, basically to prepare for the eventuality of populist nationalists coming to power. And yeah, I mean, it all needs to be dismantled. That's why it's a positive thing if you get more rightist parties in countries like Germany and Poland. I mean, Germany especially, like it's I think it would have been unthinkable at some point. Like Germany has really been the ground zero for this post-war model of liberal governance, pluralism, that you have this kind of broad civil society, you have populism very much under wraps. The state takes a very strict position on what's the acceptable bounds of discourse. You have basically special branches and military forces that are there to monitor the rise of populism. You have a very liberal media. You have a very favorable political system in terms of a very stable center-left, center-right. Like Germany has all of the infrastructure, and it has more than any country, I think, this kind of moral impetus that's been driving everyone in the post-war period of never again, right? That was the whole foundation.
But can I bring you back to treaties? Because you mentioned treaties. I mean, it seems to me that politics is deeply cynical. I mean, the truth is that, for example, the Irish government are quite happy to break all sorts of treaties. For example, in the trampling of voluntary informed consent during COVID, everything that came in around that period about lockdowns and all the rest of it. And also, I mean, there was an international treaty, I think it was from the late 50s, just to do with civil and political rights, which basically said that, you know, you will never be forced to take a medicine unless you have informed consent. Now, that was just trampled to death by everybody. And I mean, a lot of the time, the Irish government are quite happy to turn a blind eye to breaches of constitutional rights. I've had an interview in here with looking with a senior barrister looking at a protected disclosure in the area the pharmaceutical area that's just been thrown out under false pretenses by the pharmaceutical regulator. So I mean, like, the real business of the state behind it all, it can be deeply cynical. So the idea that progressive leftish governments can take the high moral ground or virtue signal is utter nonsense. I mean, if it's not working on behalf of the people, then these things have to be broken and put back together again.
Yeah, that's it. And I mean, unfortunately, the problem so often is you get leftist governments that establish this stuff that's really specifically there to constrain the right and to constrain whoever their political enemies will be when they're out of power. And then the right comes in and kind of just accepts that and works within that and thinks maybe it's upsetting the apple cart a little bit too much if you go and repeal some of this stuff. I mean, I think Tony Blair's government is the perfect example where he passes all of these anti-racism bills and speech bills and so on. And there's the Convention on Human Rights. And subsequent governments are just, their hands are tied behind their back. But again, I think this is something that's changing with younger people on the right and some of these more radical parties. Is there is a sense now that, we've had some kind of populist politicians in, they haven't really achieved much. And there's a sense now that actually, you can just undo this stuff. And that actually needs to be the beginning of it, is you need to be able to look at the stuff that we've had in the last 20, 30 years and say, most of this stuff just needs to be repealed if you're even to have the possibility of sane government again.
I've two last questions for you. Second last question was, one of the things that seemed to me to be, sometimes I look at things and say, well, what's happening in the space between the stars? What's missing here? And I just wanted to ask you, so I know you have very direct answers, but I mean, there doesn't seem to be, there wasn't a mention in this particular documentary on the kind of Islamic type of immigration coming into countries or into Germany or into Poland. Was there a reason for that?
Not specifically, no. I mean, in Poland, it's just not a factor, right? They don't. That's one thing the Law and Justice, the Peace Party, did is they have allowed legal immigration from countries like South America. When we were there, actually, just when we arrived, it was a Venezuelan migrant who had overstayed a visa, did a brutal murder of a young PhD student. But they allowed a lot of that kind of legal immigration. But they did actually, because of the potential, it would be a big backlash from the Poles. They avoided Muslim immigration. Now, Germany does have increasingly a problem with this. It wasn't in the scope of this documentary to cover it. But, I mean, I'll give you an example. Last year, there was, I believe it was Hamburg. It was an 1,100 strong protest of Muslims on the streets of a German city demanding Sharia law. So yeah, Germany has created a real problem there. It's got almost twice as many mosques as the UK.
Is that per head of population or in total number?
In total number.
Okay.
And it's
really, the population are pretty similar, aren't they?
Yeah. So it would be quite a per capita difference as well. Yeah. And like the left in Germany have really kind of empowered Muslims to be a political bloc. It's one thing just having them there in numbers, but you actually have, I mean, that the Sharia law protest, that was organized by one of these kind of friendly sounding sort of Islamic NGOs, right? So they've been really politicalized by the left in Germany, and to have this sense of that they're opposed to populism, to German nationalism. Actually, a survey was done on it, I believe, early this year, and it found that 1 in 5 Muslims in Germany have beliefs that will be characterized as deeply anti-Western, and that they and this is within the confines of this survey, that, they hold the West responsible for most of the evils in the world, that they resent the West, they have a deep resentment is how it's characterized. And a good portion of them, I think about 10% of them, think that essentially any violence is justified against the West on that basis. And when you break that down in numbers, there's about 300,000 Muslims in Germany that think the West is responsible for the world's evil, and it's good and just to commit violence against the West. So that's a huge population. And then you have to think of, how is that going to be activated? What, you get an AfD government, what happens to those people? How are they going to respond?
Very interesting point. And finally then, the actual product itself, I understand this new channel that you had set up on YouTube is not there. That came as a bit of a surprise.
Right, yeah.
And in other words, where is it, for those that want to watch your documentary, where can they see it? And how will it be available to them over the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, I mean, it surprised us a little bit how quickly it was, the entire channel was banned. So unfortunately, we didn't get a lot of other backup platforms. Right now, it's on X. If you go x.com, the ad is just at Europa. Yep. So if you go there, you'll find it pinned. It's also pinned on my X account, Twitter account, at Keith Woods YT. But yeah, I mean, again,
so Europa, it's at Europa. That's EUROPA.
Yeah, okay. That's the handle. And this is a new media project I'm involved in. You see, we haven't even launched everything yet. We have a website. We're going to have a news aggregator. But it was very early stages. We said we'd put the documentary out, and one day on YouTube, and the entire channel is gone. So this is unfortunately how it works. I was banned a year to the day tomorrow, actually. And in that case, I had no strikes. It was, I think I talked about this in your show before, but Media Matters for America wrote a hit piece about me.
And who are Media Matters?
This is a partisan Democrat NGO in the US that had, this is all for public consumption. You can find this startup capital from George Soros.
Okay.
And was responsible actually for Tucker Carlson originally losing his advertisements.
Oh, there's a surprise. Mr. Soros, seed capital.
Yeah, so they write a hit piece about a guy in Ireland, and then I lose my biggest donation platform, and then lose YouTube. And now we have a separate project that, I mean, I never even logged into this channel, but because my face is on this channel, the entire thing is nuked out of orbit. So this is unfortunately the realities you face if you try and have the honest conversation about migration.
Okay, well, listen, Keith, thanks for coming in. It'd be very interesting to see how the documentary does. For those that, let me just repeat this. You can actually see this on X. You can see it on Keith's own channel, and which is at Keith Woods. And you can also see it on at Europa. And it'll also be available on other platforms, I'd imagine, in the very near future.
Yeah. So we will establish backups now. Like I said, it was we thought maybe there'd be censorship, but entire channel gone in a day was a bit much. So.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. We'll see what happens. It's a long road. I mean, the changes in Europe are dramatic. Even already, they're quite dramatic across. We've only talked about Germany and Poland. We could be talking about Holland. We could be talking about Greece. We could be talking about Italy and so on. Eventually, we'll be talking about Ireland, probably in due course. But we'll see how all that works out. So I want to thank you for coming into studio. Remember, if you like this content and you think it's important, hit the 2 big buttons, like and subscribe, obviously, just below. But more importantly, get the content and send it to your friends and start those discussions one by one by one. Let the lights go on. Look at the data. Look at the alternative views, and just have those discussions amongst us. Engage. That's classic critical thinking. And pull ourselves away from mainstream media and the quagmire that they've got us into, thinking that this is how the world operates when clearly it isn't.